Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Kurachi and in this video lecture we're going to focus on desktop and server OS vulnerabilities. Now, by the end of this module, you should be able to describe the vulnerabilities of Windows and Linux operating system, identify specific vulnerabilities and explain ways to fix them, explain techniques to harden Windows and Linux system. Now, first of all, let's look at the Windows OS vulnerabilities. There are many Windows OS have, serious vulnerabilities, like from Windows 2000 and the earlier versions. Administrator had to disable, reconfigure, or even uninstall services and features. The latest one, for example, they did some improvement, a lot of improvement over the past. Like for example, they disabled most services and features by default to improve security in it. Now, if you want to learn more about the vulnerabilities related not only to Windows, but also to other application, other operating system, simply you could visit the CVE website and type, any information related, like you could check the CVE, and it will give you detailed information about the vulnerabilities like this, for example, like if you look at CVE ID, here you can see like CVE 2021 34527. Now, the CVE, okay, first of all, it stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposure. This is the standardized naming convention for publicly known information security vulnerabilities here. And then here, this is the year which was, made public or known, and this is the specific identification number for this particular vulnerability. And here you can see basically the description of it. So once you read about the description, you will have a good idea what this vulnerability impact and to which system, application, or operating system. Now, there are many explanations on the CVE website, and they're very complex, by the way. And there are a lot of criteria done in order, to publish this information. So I always advise everyone to become familiar with the CVE website. Now, the security tester will use the CVE site, to test Windows computer system against the vulnerabilities that has been discovered. This is why it becomes very important for security, professionals to patch Microsoft servers and workstations with the latest update as soon as possible. Now let's look at the Windows file system. Basically, using file system, it will help everyone to store and manage files that users create, organize it, and organize the files, for users. Also organize the operating system files to boot the system, and this is considered one of the most important part of any operating system. Now let's look first as for the file allocation table, the FAT. FAT is old, and this is the original Microsoft file system. It supports by nearly all desktop and server based system from 1981 until now. Now, the later or the latest things provide support for larger file and disk size. For example, like FAT32, this is the standard file system for removable media like CDs and DVDs. Now, the most serious shortcoming, the biggest problem, it does not support file level access control. That means you cannot set permissions, and especially detailed permissions, which means that it does not provide efficient security. And for multi-user environment results, it's not very good. Uh, Not to mention, also it has some issue with the performance and efficiency, like it suffer from fragmentation. Okay, so over time, this fragmentation will cause system to slow down, and also the metadata support doesn't have a features like file permission or encryption features like NTFS, you know. So basically, it lacks many features found in NTFS, like the one you see it on the screen here. Now, NTFS stands for New Technology File System. It was first released in Windows NT 3.1 and 3.51. It added additional support like for, for larger files, disk volumes, and access control list file security. Now it's being supported in all Windows versions, including the upgrades. So think about NTFS like what? Like a central metadata repository for all files and directories. Now, from security perspective, NTFS features very comprehensive access control list, like read, write, execute, and some other things which basically give you granular permission management. Also, another important thing, it gives you file level encryption through something they call it EFS, which stands for Encryption File System. And very important thing, support for disk level encryption using BitLocker. Now, there are some vulnerabilities, like for example, like the alternate data streams, ADS, which is basically, you could hide information within the files without impacting the function, the size, or any other information, which makes it possible for a system intruder to hide exploitation tools and other malicious files. Now, ADS basically provide an ID mechanism for attackers to hide malicious files or tools or even data behind, legitimate files. Now, this concealment often aids in evading standard security mechanism, like antivirus or firewalls or IDS, IPS. And it can be used for covert data storage or exfiltration. Now, malicious actors may use it to store stolen data temporarily before, they moving it out of the target network. Now, there are several detection methods exist there. I mean, like using third-party tools designed to detect ADS. So this can be useful, like in also in deep forensics investigation. And many forensics tools will tell you if there is an ADS in the file system. Now, do not confuse ADS with steganography, which is something we will cover it in cryptography chapter, because steganography focuses on covertly embedding data within a file and employs also encryption. On the other hand, ADS utilizes NTFS file system feature to append additional data to the existing file without affecting their visible properties. But however, it does not offer encryption at all. Now let's look at the remote procedure calls. RPC serves basically as a base for distributing computer, enabling communication between different processes running on different systems. So of the issues are okay, but however, there are some issues involved with this part. I mean, a long time ago, the Conficker worm exploited RPC by taking advantage of the vulnerability in RPC itself. Imagine what does it mean? Okay, it means that you could access the target system remotely. Now, what are the security issues related to RPC that has been discovered in the past? The first one is authentication weakness. Like, for example, like it has inadequate identity verification. It doesn't have strong, robust authentication mechanism. Means it could possibly permit unauthorized access to important data. The older RPC-based services may still employ, a weak authentication mechanism like DES. Now, also, the authorization flows here. Like for example, you could have an issue with exclusive privileges. Any services or procedures exposed to the RPC can run with elevated privileges. You know, yeah. And you could have an advocate access control as well. Advocate access controls means that you will have insufficient, basically insufficient granularity and permission settings, which allows user with limited access to that. So also another thing, like it could have employed unencrypted data transmission, you know, and exclusive privileges as well as I explained before. Okay, and inadequate access control as well too. All these can cause some issues in the security if it's not done correctly. Now, Nessus, it's a very good tool for determining whether a system is vulnerable due to RPC related security issue here for other configuration issues as well. Now let's look at server message block. Now, SMB used to share files. Think about it, it's like a network file sharing protocol, mainly used for providing shared resources to files, printers, and various communications between nodes on a network. Initially, by the way, it was developed by IBM, but it was adopted by Microsoft. It runs on the top of NetBIOS, NetBEUI, and TCP. Okay. There are several hacking tools target SMB, example, this tool and SMB Relay. But Microsoft finally patched those vulnerabilities, but I'm sure there are others. Now, let's look at different versions of SMB. Here we have, there's a version 1, by the way, which is the original one, outdated, insecure. There's 2, here it has been implemented in Windows Vista and provides improvements in performance and security a little bit. And now you have SMB3 in Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012. It added additional security and performance features like failover, for example. Now now the latest release here, SMB 3.1.1 in Windows 10. It fixed a lot of security issues. It added several new features like the pre-authentication integrity. Like it uses SHA 512 hash to protect against man in the middle attack during what? The authentication phase here. Okay, which means it will verify the integrity of the negotiation process. Now, for encryption improvements here, basically it uses AES encryption algorithm 128 and 256 here. Now, what's the latest release? Like I mentioned, SMB 3.1, 3.1.1. Okay. Now, it has some improvement, a lot of improvements comparing to the previous versions. For example, it increased the throughput and lower latency. Basically, it can reach a throughput of up to 32 gigabit per second, which is much faster than the previous versions of SMB. Because it has a lower latency, which means the files can be open and closed fast. Now, improved security, it supports end-to-end encryption during transmission. This is very important. And the best part, it's support for larger files here, which means, I think it can reach up to 8 exabytes in size, which is very suitable for use in high performance computing environment. Now, What are vulnerabilities there? I mean, insufficient authentication authorization, could be like weak encryption in older ones. You could suffer from buffer overflow vulnerabilities, and the worst is man-in-the-middle attacks. Okay, if you don't have sufficient encryption algorithm employed. Now let's look at the common internet file system. You know, Think about this as a network file sharing protocol that allows users to access files and folders on the remote computers, you know, as if they were stored locally. The good thing about it is that it's a cross-platform protocol, means that you could share files between different operating systems, like Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and it is backward compatible also as well. Okay, so uh, it relies, by the way, on other protocols to handle service announcement, like notify users of available resources that has become available on your network. Now, it offers many enhancements. Let's look at each one of them briefly, like locking features. The CIFS supports file locking, which means it allows multiple users to access the same file without overwriting each other. Especially, I mean, this is important, okay, for application that needs to maintain data integrity like database or spreadsheets. Caching and read ahead, write behind capability. Now, it supports caching, which means that the frequently accessed files are saved in the memory for faster loading, kind of similar to the network proxy, in concept. This can improve performance by reducing the number of times that the file needs to be read from the disk. Also, it supports, the read ahead, write behind capability. Now, this means what? Okay, means it allows the client to start reading or writing data to a file before the entire file can be transferred. So this basically helped to enhance the performance by reducing the amount of time the client, or the user needs to wait for the file to be transferred. It supports fault tolerance, you know. Even if network fail, it still can support, assuming that you have the right hardware. Capability to run more efficiently over slow dial-up lines. No one uses dial-up lines anymore, but it can support slow dial-up lines. Okay. Its support for anonymous and authenticated users means it can allow anonymous authentication, or it allow authenticated access. Now, it help and when it comes to share level security or user level security in the server. What does it mean? Like the share level security, it's a file access control that allows you to control who can access a shared resources based on the share itself. Like, for example, you can create a share that is only accessible, to certain groups in your domain, for example, like marketing group. Okay. Or you could create a share that allows anyone to read files, but only certain member of some groups, like research people, research and development group, to write files. Now, it has a user level security. Okay, so with the user level security means each user account has its own set of permission, which define what resources they can access, like read, write, execute, and what they can do, with them. Okay. Now, for common, in, okay, for we continue with that. There's a newer version of Windows Server. Also, listen on the most of the same ports as older version. What this supposed to mean here? It means that the ports that are used by newer versions right now of Windows Server like file sharing, printing, authentication, they are still the same ports used by the older one. Nothing changed. Now, most attackers look for servers designated as a domain controllers, server that handle authentication. Now, most attackers look for these servers, like a domain controller, even though it's not easy. Why? Simply because it is responsible for authenticating users and controlling access to resources in a domain, uh, and these domain controller also they handle authentication here. So I mean, if you're familiar with the Windows domain controller Active Directory, you will know that the domain controllers handle authentication by basically storing the user accounts and the password and even computer names, everything in the Active Directory. Like in case of a user account and password, like when a user tries to log on to a computer in a domain, the domain controller checks the user's account and password to see if they are valid. Now, here the same Windows domain controllers are usually global catalog servers. And global catalog servers are used to locate resources in a domain containing thousands or even millions of objects. Now, a global catalog server is a server. It's part of Windows Active Directory because it contains a copy of all objects in a domain directory. It includes like user accounts, computer accounts, also group accounts, you know. So the global catalog servers can be used to locate resources in a domain containing thousands or even millions of objects. Now, attackers love to target domain controllers. Why? I mean, by now that because they are critical to security of the domain. If they can gain control of a domain controller, like in Windows Active Directory, that means the attacker can gain access to all of the resources in a domain, including everything I mentioned, like user accounts, passwords, and files. Now, nil sessions was discussed in enumeration chapter. Just a quick recap, a nil session is anonymous connection established without credential, which means that there's unauthenticated connection to a Windows server. This is one of the biggest vulnerabilities of NT BIOS system because it does not use login and password. Now, the good news that null session is not available anymore in the latest Windows, and you could enumerate the NetBIOS vulnerability using these tools. Now, let's talk about web services. I mean, those web services basically they run on the top of Windows operating system, servers here. Now, the older web services and IIS, they they got installed with very critical security vulnerabilities. Uh, and Microsoft to to reduce those type of vulnerabilities, they come up with IIS Lockdown Wizard. We use it in the past, to harden the IIS web server against common vulnerabilities and attacks. In fact, it played a major role in enhancing the security position of the web server. And now also we have IIS 5, it's installed and by default in Windows 2000 Server. Uh, Unfortunately, this the Windows Server is also has a web server installed by default, and there are some configuration were not secure. Now IIS 6 through IIS 10, the installation is secure by default mode. Okay. Now one of the important security features that they come up with in the latest version of IIS 10 is that it support for HTTP2, which is the next generation of HTTP protocol. It has support for Windows PowerShell 5.0, better performance and scalability, uh, better security features, and enhanced management capabilities. Now, keeping a system patch, this is extremely important. it's very important. Like those software patches often include fixes for known vulnerabilities, but by applying these patches, you're closing these security gaps. And also remember that it's like if you work in a certain organization that they need to comply with a certain rules or laws, like HIPAA or like rules like PCI, DSS, they often mandate that the system must be kept up to date. Okay. Now, configuring all the needed services and application is a wise move, absolutely. When you do this, basically, you're reducing the attack surface, because every service and application on the system represent a potential attack vector. When you limit those services and application to only those that are necessary, you are reducing the number of potential entry points for attackers. Not to mention also here we have resource optimization, unneeded services, consume system resources, and it could impact the performance. So when you remove unneeded services, you're basically enhancing the system efficiency. Now, Microsoft SQL Server, again, those are old SQL Server. They're not in operation anymore, but so one of the just briefly, we had an issue in the past with an old system administrator password was very critical SQL vulnerabilities. Also like SQL Server 2000, the SA, the system administrator account with a blank password is created. This account cannot be disabled also, which means it gives the attackers administrative access to the database and database. Now, the SQL Server 2022, it has improved performance and scalability. There are new security features, enhanced analytical capabilities, and support for Azure. Now, what are the new security features here? Like those features, like for example, like the transparent data encryption (TDE), which encrypts all data at rest, including the database files, log files, and backups. Now, there's also something else called dynamic data masking. It allows you to mask sensitive data in a database that's only visible to authorized users, and basically, this can be used to protect data, like social security numbers or credit card numbers, even medical records. Also, you have the raw level security, which allows you to control who has access to a specific rows in the table. Okay, and obviously you could see that this is important because it can protect sensitive data from unauthorized users. Now, enhanced analytics capability, there are additional features that has been added to give you better insights from your data much faster and easily, so you could make better decision based on your data. Now let's look at the buffer overflows. Buffer overflows, it's a major issue. Its data is written to a buffer, corrupts data in a memory next to allocated buffer. You know, Buffers are used to temporarily store data while it is being processed. They are typically allocated like a fixed amount of memory, like here, you see, that's a fixed amount of memory, you know, and the program is supposed to check that amount, if it's, amount that is writing to the buffer that does not exceed the limitation set over here you know. However, if the program does not do the check, what's going to happen that it's going to basically copy or overflow other memory addresses, as you could see it here. Here you can see the exclusive. You want to copy it into this memory area over here. Unfortunately, because the application does not check this, okay, uh, the length uh, of this word, it basically override, over overflow to the other memory location, which means that, you know, it could impact, or it could corrupt data, or could crash the program, or even allow the attacker to execute arbitrary code. So the fact is that buffer overflow is a very serious security vulnerability. It happened uh, before. One of the reasons is that the C and C++, they lack built-in protection against overwriting data in memory. Now, the question is right now, after you understood the buffer overflow, what do I need to do to protect? I mean, first of all, you need to implement input validation to ensure that the amount of data written in this memory, okay, or to the buffer does not exceed the allocated amount. It's also a good idea to use a memory protection mechanism to prevent unauthorized access to memory location. Also, it's a good idea to use sandbox to isolate untrusted code, even the trusted code, from each other, and from the rest of the system. And obviously, it goes without saying, keeping software up to date with the latest security patches. Now, passwords and authentication. Authorized users are basically the weakest security link in any network. Most difficult to secure. You know, Relies on the people who might not realize that their action could expose their organization to a major security breach. One of the things that companies need to do, you need to have very good password policy. A comprehensive password policy should include, like, change the password regularly, require at least 8 characters, require complex password. Passwords cannot be common words or dictionary words or slang and so on. Password must not be identified with a particular user. Like, never write it down, okay, on your desk, or store it online. Do not reveal it to anyone. Be careful when you log into the system. Okay. Now, configuring domain controllers to enforce password age, length, and complexity. And here, what we're looking at the group policy management, which is part of Windows Server. When you install Active Directory on it, here you have the password policies. And like, if you click on the password policy, you will see basically different options. Like enforce password history. You could change the settings here. Maximum password age. Minimum password age. Minimum password length you could decide, and the password must meet complexity requirements, and so on. And there's also another important configuration, which is account lockout policy. Okay, you can always set it up, okay, based on the security policy set by the organization. Like, for example, like if somebody tried to use your username and a password tag to log in, and if they get locked out, for how long? 30 minutes. Okay. Like after 5 invalid login attempts, reset account lockout counter, after 30 minutes. So again, these settings needs to be discussed as a team, and decide which one needs to be applied to your enterprise. Now, there are many, many tools can help you identifying vulnerabilities in Windows. Many tools like such as Tripwire IP360, Nessus, OpenVAS, and on my YouTube channel, inside the vulnerability scanning playlist, I have different videos that will teach you, how to configure, okay, and including installation, of course, configuration, and understanding the different features on each one of them, and so you become more familiar about Nessus and OpenVAS. Now, let's look at the patch management. We always hear every once in a while that Microsoft releases those patches here. And when Microsoft learns of a problems or vulnerabilities in the software, it publish patches, security updates, service packs, and hot fixes. Now, basically, to summarize this and to understand the difference between each one of them, here you could see that here's the feature, what I just mentioned here, and the size. And you could see that the patch is small, frequency released frequently, urgency not urgent, coverage like fix a bug or a vulnerability. Now, I'm sure you heard about the service pack, for example. This is for medium to large, released less frequently, okay, not urgent, fixes bugs and vulnerabilities and may also include other changes or updates or enhancements. There's the hot fix. Hot fix, this is urgent, okay, and released as needed. And this applies to not only to small to medium or even to large organization, and it fixes very critical issues here. Now, what are the best practices for hardening Windows system here? Now, pen tester finds and report vulnerabilities as defined in their contract. Security tester, they find the vulnerabilities and give recommendation. Now, there are best practices, and I always recommend the system administrators also to put together like a guide like I have done before. And this guide can include things that needs to be configured. You could go to Microsoft and look for the recommendation for hardening server, or you could look for other resources. Now, but I'm going to discuss some of them here. Like, for example, like least privilege principle means that you need to install the system with the minimum set of features and roles, like uh, remove application for example, not needed. Secure boot. Enable secure boot in the UEFI settings to ensure only signed bootloaders are used. Admin accounts. Obviously, you need to limit number of users with the administrative privileges. User permissions, implement the principles of the least privilege for user accounts. Now, two-factor authentication, now this is important, and we see more and more organizations are doing it. Now, this is very important here, secure configuration guidelines, and those basically it's a guidelines that are provided by the Center for Internet Security, CIS, or the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA. And I strongly recommend, to visit those sites and to become familiar with it because it has a wealth of information to help you provide better security and configuration for your Windows system. Like, for example, like the system installation and the initial setup, like basically disable unnecessary services or even remove them, or even disable unused hardware and setting up essential security features, like firewall, even antivirus. And also like for account management, basically, these are recommendations for setting up user accounts in line with the principle of least privilege. Okay. Also, like, it can include guidelines like about the best way in creating administrative accounts, setting up strong authentication measures, and many, many, many more. Also for file and directory permission, how, what is the best practices for, setting up permission for file and directories for users and the groups. There's also other, guidelines, like, of course, like network configuration, like, which means that setting up network parameters, like firewalls, port configuration, and other things. Of course, the application hardening, application needs to install on the top of the Windows server. there are specific recommendations are made to securely configure applications that run on the system. Like what I meant to say, like web servers, as I discussed previously in the slide, database servers, and other components. And monitoring and auditing also, this is extremely important. Enable the most important logs, but do not enable every log in the system because it will impact the performance. But focus on the most important logs that you need to uh, look at it every once, uh, every once in a while, and and read. And also, there's a patch management, which is are the best practices for keeping the system up to date. And this is going to be our next topic of discussion. Okay, so now let's talk about patching systems. I'm just gonna give you a quick idea how this type of system works based on my experience uh, in this. Now, usually there will be like a small agent file running in every client or computer system, and this agent will collect information about your system, if you're missing any patches or hot fixes, everything, and will report it back to the console. And then from that point, you could decide on sending updates to this particular machine. You could schedule the updates, So patching system is basically the best way to keep systems secure. You keep them up to date. It is not really difficult, like if you have very few machines, to access Windows update manually, like three, four, it can be time consuming, but however, you could always configure automatic updates on each one of these machines depending on the Windows version. Now, I want to make a point about understanding the difference between automatic updates and and you should be aware of advantage and disadvantage. Now, the advantage of automatic updates, think about it like from faster. It can be applied as soon as released. You can be a consistent in applying updates, by ensuring that all systems in your corporate are patched to the same level. You know, this is especially very helpful in large scale deployments where manual intervention may be extremely challenging. Now, it does reduce operational overhead, because it does reduce the time and resources required for IT department to roll out patches. And this is very important part of compliances, to remain compliant. Otherwise, they would penalize you. And also, it is, from user perspective, this is very convenient, because many users are not technically savvy. So therefore, automatic updates relieve them from having to manually install updates. On the other hand, there's a disadvantage of this. Now, in many cases, before we notice system instability, like some patches may cause issues with existing software configuration, you know, being in the system become unstable or might go down. And also some new updates are not always compatible with the software or services running on the system. So you will have eventually operational disruption. um, Unscheduled restarts, that's something else. Windows needs to restart, Now, a patching system like this, you push the updates and you configure the push, the updates to be done at, let's say, later on at night, and then and Windows has to update. Okay, and another important thing, lack of testing. You know, those patches deployed automatically do not undergo organization-specific testing to ensure that do not interfere with existing software or that. So that's something very important to pay attention to. Now, uh, if you look at here, okay, so if you want solution for large networks, one option is the Windows Software Update Service. You could download patches and publish them internally to servers and desktop. You have good control over the updates, being deployed, and it's free, easy to set up and use. However, uh, Microsoft have another solution for bigger size, like Windows. It's called System Center Configuration Manager (SCCM). It has a bunch of tools to help administrator deploy and manage servers alongside updated patch management. Now, some of the benefits of it, it's more comprehensive management capabilities to manage than the WSUS, by the way. And it has more modern solution that is built on Microsoft latest technology, and it can be scaled to meet the needs of the organization of all sizes here. However, the disadvantage or the cons is that it is high cost to purchase and run. For example, you will need Microsoft SQL Server to run at the same time. There's a difficulty in patching third-party application. Could be incomplete management of non-Windows system, and that's another issue that it puts extra burden and pressure on IT administrators. It requires a steep learning curve for administrator. So basically, if you're looking for a free and easy to use software, update management system, the WSUS is a good option. However, if you need more comprehensive, scalable solution, then you should consider the commercial one, which is SCCM here. However, in spite the fact that there's other companies there, they sell solution like this, I strongly recommend reviewing other products and making comparison between their features and the SCCM features, and keep an eyes open about what's the cons, for each one of them. Now, these pictures were taken from GFI Land Guard. I used it before, and you can see that the GFI Land Guard, you could configure it to scan a specific number of computers, and it will list for you the computers that have missing patches here. Like this is, for example, this is patch name for this. This is patch name for this. Now, you could scan the network for the missing patches. You can find gaps in Microsoft, Mac OS, even Linux. And then you identify those patches, basically in a web browser interface, including also it can find missing patches in web browsers in every computer you want to scan. And also it can scan third-party software like Adobe, Java, and much more application. Now here you could see that the patching system here, you could deploy software updates, you could uninstall software updates, you could deploy custom software, uninstall. And by the way, all this information can be collected simply by deploying an agent's small, tiny, mini software that runs in the background of the system, and it can basically collect this information and send it to the server. And at the end, it can generate, a screenshot, reports like this here, so you could see the status, what was patched, what was not patched, and so on. Now let's look at antivirus solution. Antivirus is very important for small networks, and there's desktop antivirus tools. Also, now, however, for large networks, it require corporate level solution. Now, antivirus tools must be planned, installed, configured correctly to ensure the latest protection. And if it's not updated regularly, it becomes useless. Now, for corporate solution, it is not just antivirus. In fact, like if you examine different type of softwares out there, like from Symantec or Norton, stuff like this, you find that they incorporate uh, more features than just antivirus. Like, for example, like uh, corporate like endpoint, like which means like the practice of protecting endpoint system for cyber attacks. They have endpoint system. Okay, which includes like antivirus, firewall, IDS. Also, they could have DLP, data loss prevention, which is a feature control that transfers sensitive data. Again, this is a big topic, very important topic also to understand. You know, it might have integrated firewall management. You know, and in fact, some of those solutions out there, they add threat intelligence feed, that basically provide information on the latest and the newest vulnerabilities, malware signature, and attack strategy. And the best part, it has a centralized dashboard which allows your IT administrator to manage security policies, remote deployments, and other configuration for clients. Now, enable logging and review log regular. Logging is very important thing here, function for monitoring system security, Review logs regularly for sign of intrusion, You could use log monitoring tool. Now, okay, logging is a crucial function. Why? Logs can provide valuable information about the system activities, like when did the user log in, what type of files has been accessed, the network traffic. Now, this information can be used to identify suspicious activity or malicious attacks. Now, you should always carefully record only useful statistics because simply not all log data is created equally. It's important to carefully design and select which log events to record so you don't end up with a large amount of usage data and you don't put too much pressure on the server resources as well. Now, review logs regular for sign of intrusion. Okay, here's the thing. It's not enough to collect log data. You have to review them, look for signs of suspicious activity, and then you could act accordingly. Like for example, if you notice, continuous scanning coming from particular IP against system, simply we could create a rule in the firewall to block this IP completely. This is just an example. Also, you could use log monitoring tool. There are many, many, many professional tools out there that can automate this large number of logs being collected, analyzed. Because what it does, it automates the process of collecting, analyzing, and reporting on the log data. Now, it makes your job much easier. For example, you got Splunk. It's a commercial logging system known for its powerful search capabilities. It can be used to collect and search log data from variety of sources, including servers, application, and networks. It has very powerful search engine to find patterns and anomalies in the log data. It can also create alerts to notify you of any suspicious activity here. It's a very good choice for enterprise that need powerful, scalable logging system. Now, there is no discussion can be completed honestly without talking about SIM. SIM is a security solution that helps organizations collect, analyze, and correlate security logs and events from different sources like servers, application, network. Now, one of my favorite tools is IBM Q Radar. Now, IBM Q Radar basically it process security relevant data from wide variety of sources. Like from firewalls, user directories, proxies, application, routers. Okay, so the way it works like this, after it collect all of this and analyze that in real time, it will correlate the data, which means what? Or how does it help? It enables security analysts to perform investigation. Okay, so why? Because it provides very useful information. Now, here's the examples of the information that a SIM can correlate, like a point in time, offending users, origins, IP origins, which targets IPs, vulnerability, asset information, known threats, you know. And if you look at the screen here, the dashboard, this is the dashboard. You could always customize the dashboard. You could remove one, you could add one, depending on you want. You will have an option. The minute you click here, you will have an option to select, like if you want to add latest threads, and then simply you just add it anywhere you want. Okay. Offenses, if you click on offenses, you find list of offenses here with the detailed information about each offense, IP, when it started, the MAC address, if possible, uh, the destination IP, the source IP, the port, and so on. Also, he have log activity, You have network activity, the same thing. The minute you click, you find a bunch of it. Now the asset here, this is basic asset information. It can include information like asset host names, IP addresses, MAC addresses, and operating system details. And here's the admin. Okay, to modify some administration information, and here's the user analytics to focus on the user activities. And here you can see the name of the users right here. Now another thing here, as this is very important, and this is disable unused or unneeded services. I mean, look here. This is services from Windows, workstation, or servers. You can click on the properties over here, and then you could say, for example, disable right here. Okay, and you could do it manual to start it manual, or you could do it automatically. Okay, now if you do not need the service, basically you need to disable. This is part of something we call a system hardening process. When you disable these application or scripts, basically you are reducing attack surface. Means that you only need only open what needs to be open and close everything else. That means I don't need this application, shut it down. I don't need to have it running here. So you're reducing the attack surface and improve the security of your system. Now there are many other security best practices here, like obviously you have to minimize the number of administrative users. That's very important. Implement software preventing data from leaving, like DLP, the one I mentioned. Use network segmentation, by dividing network into smaller networks, and then you isolate each one of them to minimize the impact if security breach happen. Uh, this is very important practice. Restrict the number of applications allowed to execute on the network and a computer connected to the network. Closing service, uninstall software, even hardware. Even hardware. If there's a hardware, you do not need it, remove it. Uh, delete unused scripts and sample application. We talked about this. Delete default hidden shares. Use unique name, scheme, and password. Ensure password length and complexity, which can be implemented through Windows Server Active Directory group policies. Simply you could do this. Other practices here we have, be careful of default permission. Check out the default permission for important folders. You could enable the firewall into the system. Uh, you could use open source or commercial tools to assess system security. Like, for example, like Microsoft has its own tool, you know, to scan their Windows machine looking for vulnerability, and can help you with the patching. You could use file integrity checker like a tripwire. You can focus on, for example, like install tripwire on the server, and you can ask it to look into particular Windows folder to see to monitor for any changes or any suspicious changes, that so the system can alert you. Tripwire used it before. Disable the guest account, disable the local administrator account. Okay. Disable accounts of users no longer with the company. All these should be part of a policy, by the way. You know, make sure there are no accounts with a blank password. Again, this is part of the policy. Windows group policies to enforce security configurations on a large network, to be consistent. Again, Active Directory, the Windows group policies. Okay, this is very powerful tool that can basically makes the life of the IT administrator so easy, so simple. I mean, to the point they could push Microsoft Office, to their computers. Of course, develop a comprehensive security awareness program. send out emails every once in a while to alert users about possible threats, make users take some training courses, and of course, as a person in IT, you have to always keep up with the emerging threats. It's a lot of work, but it's important. Do as much as you can of learning. Okay, so let's take a look at the Linux operating system vulnerability. I mean, Linux contains a lot of security features, like strict user permission modules, uh, mandatory access control, and the use of security distribution, enhanced distribution, like security enhanced Linux. However, there are some vulnerabilities over there. Like, for example, like you have the kernel vulnerabilities. I mean, if you don't know what's kernel is the core component of the operating system. It's very attractive target for attackers. Any vulnerability discovered by attacker can lead to unauthorized privilege escalation, information disclosure, and even remote code execution. Examples like, could be like buffer overflow vulnerabilities, race conditions, and null pointer dereferences. Now, another issue could be like the configuration errors. If you do not configure the file permission or the service configuration or the firewall rules correctly, you could expose the Linux box to unauthorized access. Outdated software, that could be a problem itself. That's why it's very important to keep updating your Linux flavor, up to date. Scripting and shell vulnerabilities. Shell shock is a very well-known vulnerability that affected the Linux bash shell, allowing for code execution via environment variables. And of course, application level bugs, like various web servers, database management, or any other application running on the top of the Linux, they have their own vulnerabilities, problems here. So, so this is something even, to keep in mind when you want to do update to the Linux and its application as well. Now, Samba software suite basically is an open source implementation of the server message block SMB and the common internet file system CIFS. You see right here. Okay, protocols. It basically facilitates file and print services to SMB CIF clients, uh, basically by allowing interoperability between the Unix and Linux servers and the Windows clients. In other words, it enables Unix and Linux system to act as a client for the Windows shares. Like, okay, so what type of shares we're referring to? Shares could be like file shares, printer, user authentication authorization by integrating, the authentication mechanism, like, with Active Directory or LDAP, and for network browsing with NetBIOS. Now, of course, Linux has its own share of vulnerabilities, pretty much similar to what was discussed in the Windows. Okay, so countermeasures against Linux attacks, training users, keeping up on the kernel release and security updates, configuring system and application to improve security, kernel hardening. For example, you could use, the SCE Linux or App Armor to enforce mandatory access control. We'll talk about it. Restricted permissions. Run application with the least privilege and configure user and group permission. Change root environments, isolate services in a change root environment to restrict file system access. And then you could apply role-based access control. And basically, the role-based access control means that you could configure the security based on the groups of people, like, for example, like marketing groups, sales group, research and development groups, and then you can apply the security for the whole group. And the mandatory access control, whatever, if possible. Configuration auditing using auditing tools like OpenSCAP to identify and fix insecure configuration. Disable unnecessary services. As discussed before, fewer services running means fewer attack vectors available. File integrity monitoring. You could use like a tripwire to monitor for unauthorized changes in very important system files. Always check for outdated packages, and regularly, and make sure to update it. Sanitize user input. Always sanitize and validate user inputs in the shell scripts to avoid command injection attack. By basically by implementing something we call the input validation. Limit user ID, or set ID, set group ID scripts, to only essential scripts and binaries. Okay, now let's talk about secure configuration. There are many methods out there and tools can help you to configure Linux system to help prevent intrusion, like vulnerability scanner. We discussed it before. And there is like built-in Linux tools. The security enhanced Linux, SE Linux, use mandatory access control. That's basically an OS security mechanism enforces access rules based on a privilege for interaction between processes, files, and users. You know, by the way, the security enhanced Linux is an advanced access control mechanism integrated into the Linux kernel, initially developed by the NSA. The SE Linux provides mandatory access control as opposed to the more traditional discretionary access control that the one Linux or Windows use. Of course, Windows right now it can, it does implement mandatory access control, by the way. So it's the primary objective is to enforce security policy that restrict user programs and system server access to files and network resources, basically by reducing, potential security vulnerabilities. Free benchmark, these tools are provided by Center for Internet Security, CIS, and OS Lockdown, and we will talk about those two later on. Now, this will give you a quick idea about how system work. Here you can see there's a subject, action requested could be read, write. Here's the secure Linux security server. And here's the SCE Linux policy database. And here the AVC. By the way, the AVC basically stand for Access Vector Cache, where subject and object permission are cached. Okay. Now, see, now here you could see that it uses the security policies right here, which are the rules that tell the server what can or what cannot be accessed to enforce the security policy. So the policy would tell the server, okay, that should I grant permission? Okay, if yes, it will go into the object. No, it will be denied, and the user will get a message denied. Now, on a day-by-day basis, system users will be largely unaware of SE Linux implementation, by the way. Only the system administrator need to consider how strict a policy to implement for their server environment. Now, there is also other tools called bench tools and OS lockdown. Benchmark tools provided by Center for Internet Security, CIS. It provides configuration baselines and best practices for securely configure a system. The resources include, benchmark, automated configuration assessment, tools and content, security metrics, and security software product certifications. Example, how you see the sysbench, for example. OS Lockdown, it used to be called Security Blanket, used to secure system quickly and save system administrators hours of manual configuration work. It can provide vulnerability scanning, compliance assessment, configuration management, security, even monitoring, and more. At the end, we discussed the vulnerabilities of Windows and Linux operating system. We learned to identify specific vulnerabilities and explain ways to fix them. We went over techniques to harden Windows and Linux system. And finally, I want to thank you so much for listening to this lecture, and I hope you find it useful.